Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, pursuit of property. This season is all about the EOS journey. When we talk about EOS, you're familiar with the company EOS Worldwide. Stefan Booy, guest today, it encapsulates what it means to really be EOS Worldwide from Netherlands. Spent time in all over the world. The longest stretch of his time is home in Arkansas. Stefan, how how's it going, and how similar or different is the Arkansas life versus your Northern European years?
Man, that could take the whole episode. We may not talk about US if we just talk about cultural and geographical differences. Very different. I did grow up in Italy, actually, to Dutch parents. So when you say worldwide, indeed, spent most of my youth in Southern Europe, and then graduated high school from there, came to America for college. Radically different. I mean, obviously, spaces is probably the thing that jumps to mind. I would say you could probably boil down space and density, population density, as the root of all the differences. Meaning that if I had gone from Italy to, say, New York or Boston or San Diego actually probably the closest thing because I grew up on the beach, I would have said cultural jump would have been much smaller. When you come to the middle of the country and you come to Arkansas, big difference, food, people, diversity, everything else. So yeah, very different, but very comfortable. I would say Arkansas, even having lived here and then gone back to Europe a couple of times for different stints, really chose to make Arkansas home because it's a little bit like, it's not only comfortable, but it's a little bit like a bird that's been in a cage doesn't know that they're in a cage. So most Europeans that lived in Europe all their lives, they don't realize how restrictive their life is until you get out of Europe. And then you experience the freedom you experience in America. You're like, I don't know that I want to go back to piles of bureaucracy and tons of taxes and, all those kinds of things. I mean, obviously there's benefits there too. And I miss lots of other things, but net Arkansas has been a great place for me to raise a family for sure. Yeah.
Well, where I'm from is traditionally referred to as Pennsylvania Dutch country. We have the largest population of Amish concentration in probably the world.
Right.
And so that might be more similar to a crossroad between, both the Netherlands background and the rural Arkansas, it sounds like.
Right.
Thanks for that cultural insight.
I do think that that's a different Dutch, though. I've been told that the Dutch there is more of a German type Dutch.
It's like very German.
Misnomer. Maybe it's the misnomer is really for the Dutch from the Netherlands to be called Dutch, because we don't call ourselves Dutch. We would call ourselves Netherlandish if it would be a word.
It's likely definitely a misnomer. Yeah. The dialect they speak of Pennsylvania Dutch is comparable to Quebecois speaking French in France. Mm-hmm. And they're like, this isn't real French. So your early career, I typically ask people, what did you always want to be when you grew up? But you're the first guest who had a both similar type of college and similar educational path. What prompted you to study philosophy and religious studies in school?
Yeah, I went to a high school. So in Europe, most countries in Europe that I'm aware of, you have to pick a major or at least a direction of study in high school. So when I was in high school, I went in a engineering type direction. So I study what we call the electronic engineering, so semiconductors, transistors, understanding, kind of how systems work and all that stuff. I hated it. I was a basketball player. I was part of a club academy and played a relatively high level of basketball and spent most of my time in the gym and just kind of got through classes and, didn't really enjoy it. So when I came to the U.S., I just saw this as just a big reset opportunity. I had a free ride to go to college and play. And I was like, I just want to read. I'm interested in reading, and so that's kind of what I ended up spending a lot of my time doing. And then writing was a challenge for me because I didn't write much in high school, and my English was terrible. In fact, I didn't pass the TOEFL test. The test of English is a foreign language. I failed it twice. The first time, I ended up basically having a gap year between high school and college, trying to teach myself English. And then the second time I still failed it, but just by a few points. So they said, hey, you can come you can come in the summer. So I came in May of 95. I went to Batesville, Arkansas, and there was no Italians to speak with, no Dutch people around. There's nobody else that spoke my language, so I was forced to learn English, and that's kind of how, by the time August rolled around, I was kind of making it. But so writing was a challenge early on, but it was a good, philosophy and religion really forced me to put a lot of effort into that. That was that's primarily why I chose it. I knew I was going to be on the road traveling for basketball, and reading and writing seemed like something interesting to do. I had no thought whatsoever about what to do afterwards.
You majored in basketball and minored in academics, and you had interest in reading.
I ironically really ended up doing a lot of campus life stuff. I did not join a fraternity, but I was in every club you can think of. I just thrived in that small environment. It was nothing like, talk about differences and cultural differences with Europe. That idea of a campus and everybody living together and experiencing life together was very, very, very different. And I loved it. It was like, to me, it was like camp 9 months out of the year. It was a blast. You never get to learn, which is teamwork and leadership skills and organizational skills, program management, program planning, project management type stuff like that. Like in Italy, if I had gone to university in Italy, you just go to a massive university, you sit in 500 people lecture room and listen to a professor pontificating, and then you meet him once a year for an exam, and that's it, right? And then you do 30 of those exams and you get your degree. That's the university experience in Italy. So it may have changed since I left 30 years ago. So if some Italian is listening to this and wants to counteract that, I'd love to hear their experience. But that typically was that. Now it's also basically free. Maybe you pay you get what you pay for. But I think the college experience here was really, really good.
Were there any courses or philosophers or thought leaders that stood out that may have influenced your career path early on post-graduation?
Great question. I don't think so, honestly. I ended up going in a direction, like I can't think of anything that was on the academic side. I would say it could have been, but I got rejected. So I got into Elie Wiesel, reading a lot of his stuff. And I think he was either at Boston College or Boston University. And I applied to be in their PhD program, thinking that I could do philosophy full time, and I didn't get accepted. So I reread, I think at some point I kept that letter. My application letter was horrific. After like years later, I looked at it and I was like, what was I thinking? Is there ever a time where you just look back and you're like, did I really write that? That was so idiotic. But I didn't know, I had no experience in any of that. I had no parents around. I had no guidance. All I was told was like, hey, you got to promote yourself, put your best foot forward. And that to me was just so counterintuitive. So I just wrote, I just sounded like, when I reread that letter years later, I was like, it just sounded so arrogantly boastful. I think my wife still makes fun of it sometimes. I think I said something about being above average in some area. Even 20 years later, she occasionally goes like, oh, because you're above average. I was like, golly, no wonder they rejected me. That was just so idiotic. But I don't think I knew, sometimes at a young age, you just don't know what you don't know. It's like,
if I now know as much as I thought I knew then,
right.
I'd be so above average. That story makes me think of the senior thesis that I wrote to graduate with my philosophy degree. I was so confident that this was like meaningful work. And then I read it not long ago and I'm like, the whole time I'm just cringing. Like, why do I sound so serious and so sure that this is like gospel or truth?
Yeah. Well, here's my favorite part is once, this is the beautiful part that we're still somewhat sane, right? So we realized that 30 years ago we said stupid stuff. I can't wait to be 80 years old and watch this podcast and be like, man, that 50-year-old idiot, he really didn't know, But
that's, I think, the marquee of learning, right?
Right.
Because if you thought that you had it all, if you look back at 50 and you're like, oh, he had it all figured out, then you may not have learned much in that 30-year gap.
100%.
So you attempted to do philosophy as a career, and that was redirected. But what was your start? Because I know we talked a little bit offline. You had a pivot in your 30s.
Yeah.
But in your 20s, like, were you into entrepreneurship? Were you into business or something totally
different?
Not
Not at all. I just I was thinking about going to ministry. So I worked. So with a philosophy degree, if you as an international student, you get 12 months after college to stick around with what they call an optional practical training visa. I think that thing still exists, and it has to be something tied to your work, to your field of study. And I don't know, in Batesville, Arkansas, what I was going to find tied to religion and philosophy. So I ended up working for a youth ranch, a kind of a foster home environment, and I was a counselor, almost like a camp counselor. So I did a lot of physical activity, a lot of after school programs, took kids to a doctor's appointment. And then every 2 weeks, I would substitute for some of the house parents. So my first job out of college was 8 days a month, I would be in a home with 9 troubled teenagers, and cook for them, take them to appointments, and do all sorts of stuff. So that was challenging, to say the least. And so I took a break from that, and then 3 months later, one of the house parents got a heart attack, and I ended up subbing for that family, for that couple, for about 38 days straight or something like that, without a break. I might have gotten a break from another couple, but I'm pretty sure I worked something insane, like 30 days straight with some of those kids. So basically on alert all the time, right? Being a parent as a 23-year-old of 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, right? Not that much older than me. So, but that was my first mindset, was just working with youth. I liked the idea of working with, I was involved in Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So that was kind of a field that kind of attracted me to it. And so my visa expired. So I moved back to Europe for a year, and then I got married with my American fiance. I got married in Holland, got my visa, came back, and then worked for John Brown University in campus life, and then Little Rock Christian Academy. So those were all kind of education, Christian related world.
I just want to interject. I know.
Go ahead.
You've been married for some time, and you have 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
How much did that experience, where you're essentially fostering a dozen plus teenagers,
Right,
prepare you or level set expectations for having your own kids? Because I find that it's rare to see someone that is prepared for parenting.
right.
At any age, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like that's a completely unique first gig.
No, I mean, yeah, no, it was definitely, I wouldn't say it was a deterrent, but it was definitely one of those places that reinforced probably principles that had already been instilled by my parents, maybe personality stuff. I think I'm whatever personality test I would take, it's always like that balance guy, that, justice driven, always trying to keep it fair and all this kind of stuff. So I would say the influence on having kids was more about the value of consistency more than perfection. It's like, it's rather than making the right calls or whatever. I think kids in general, and I experienced this even in the educational realm. I was a dean of students, so I was the disciplinarian, even at a rich private prep school in West Little Rock. There was always, the problems are the same. The kids that came from the difficult environments, as well as the ones that supposedly come from good environments, are still looking for the same type of structure. So it's they want to have a world in a world that can be chaotic and scary. Where is the place that I can find some stability and some things that some anchors that I can base my next step on, And I think that probably has been the preparation that gave me, or at least the confirmation, because I think that's what my parents gave me, so it probably came natural to me. But when I looked at it and saw the problems that other kids had, it's usually, I'm sure there's some truly genetic issues that you can trace, but man, a ton of stuff comes from the
environmental.
Environmental. So if parents, it's often like, I'll give you another example, the challenge that a lot of times families face is when the parents are not getting along, right? So it's not so much that they're not paying attention or they're not giving what they want. It's when the parents don't get along, that stability and that framework necessary to take risks and to learn stuff and to put yourself out there, it's starting to crumble. And so all of a sudden then the kid starts making bad decisions, because that framework is not there.
Not to jump all the way to the EOS part of the journey, but it's reminiscent of a healthy leadership team
Yeah,
being
100%.
one of the central goals that an EOS organization must strive for. It's the same, but it's synonymous with the household, as you've experienced.
Yeah.
Having an open, honest, healthy relationship. That you said something that's profound. It's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whether you're trying to be better in your faith from a religious perspective, or you're trying to be a better business person, it's like, hey, when the sooner that you can own up to it, admit a mistake, and try to take corrective action, it's when you, not to get too deep in religious theory, but one of the unforgivable sins, if not the unforgivable sin in a lot of Western thought, is turning your back on God, which is like, in my translation here, it's like thinking you're perfect or that you've made no mistake. Like, then and only then are you unable to change.
Right. No, absolutely. In fact, this would be a good pivot, a good segue into the US stuff, because my US exposure came in a company that actually had 3 partners. 2 of them were operators, and the analogies of families were incredibly similar, right? And I don't find this. I know a lot of people love to use the family analogy for a business environment and all that. I personally have tried to shy away from that because I think it brings a lot of other complications and trauma and really potentially messed up relationships. Yeah.
That term means different things to different people, especially some of the environmental children you had to deal with. Like they would run away from a family environment. That's like, I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also sets up the wrong expectations, right? Even for the owners in that case, right? It's a bit too much of a burden for them to then have to feel like they have to carry all of that. But the analogies can stand, right? Like, we don't have to use it moving forward, but we can also see how families operate, and if human relationship in that business are operating the same way, then that's a challenge. But yeah, so in my case, what EOS was able to do is to be able to say, these are not the two parents that make all the decisions and everything runs through them. We can actually set a framework where we can all agree what the rules are. Let's call it, like when I'm trying to explain EOS to new employees, I said, think of this as a playbook. It's not a perfect playbook, but it's a playbook, right? Every coach has their own playbook. You could say that one coach is better than the other, but their playbooks are, they're just playbooks. It's more important that there is a playbook, not that the playbook is perfect. Let's just have one. EOS is a very, very simple one, and it gets us all on the same page. And so we can row in the same direction. I mean, again, not with perfection, but rowing in the same direction if a team rows in the same direction, in my opinion, they're in the 1 percentile of teams.
A plan executed consistently far outperforms a perfect plan that lacks execution.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that was in the dynamics of that. And you get that a lot in EOS. Really, I think almost like the core of the energy from which EOS came out of is the fact that the entrepreneur that starts the business, a lot of times that is quintessential chaotic, right? It's like the creative is. And so, not to get too philosophical, but creation is chaos, and the next step from that is, and it's necessary, right? So value that, acknowledge that. Don't, like, I think it's, if I were to give any advice to anybody who is an implementer or integrators that come in the way, is to not take credit for the business, right? Don't step in there thinking, oh, I'm the one that brought order, or I'm the one that made this company go from X to X. It's like you got to have X to make 10X.
I mean, you're into basketball.
Yeah.
You played basketball around the same time that Michael Jordan took over the NBA by storm.
Right.
But do you think Michael Jordan would have been successful had it not been for Phil Jackson?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of, Michael Jordan is an easy example, but like if he was also the head coach of the team, the likelihood that he would be remembered today is
right.
far lower.
100%. You could say, yeah, like team after team. There's and not that it's healthy to play the credit game anyway.
Sure.
It's just one of the healthiest places, regardless of EOS, it's to be able to, but EOS does push this, is to identify what each one is good at. What is do you get it? Do you want it? Do you have the capacity? And are you the right person for the right seat? So if you grab all these things together, a good, healthy team, which includes a lot of times the founder and the creative of the business, is able to say, hey, you know what? my right seat is the one of the visionary. It's the one of sitting up there and casting the vision and hold the values and hold the culture and do those type of things. I don't need to be involved in the day to day.
The right person, right seat analogy. I want to touch on that from
Yeah,
a sports lens. So, Stefan, may I ask how tall?
6'8".
Okay. So if you had the intention to play basketball and play like, I don't know, Muggsy Bogues or Allen Iverson, maybe not the right, like that might not be something, a position you can G in the
Sure.
get it want
Right.
capacity.
Right.
But to play probably any of the forward positions or center, especially, at that level, likely a lot more likely
Right.
to
Right.
fit. For me, going back to the family dynamic, I had a father who was a Division I football player, and since the womb, he was like, "You're going to be in the NFL." Well, guess what? I'm 5'8" at my maximum fully stretched spine. Like that's
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
tall as I'm ever going to get.
Yeah.
So I got to a point in high school where it's like, oh, okay. So I play linebacker. No, I don't. Not at 150 pounds.
Right.
And I dove into wrestling where I actually fit into
Right.
genetically. And
Yeah.
I think for people that play sports, they get an advantage in terms of like knowing where they fit into a team. Whereas, and same with probably musical instruments, right? And other types of
Yeah.
extracurriculars that are important.
Yeah.
But how have you identified that you're you've had some hints, right? Of how that you're the integrator
Yeah.
versus like a visionary, and how can people that are listening to think of RPRSing or right person right seating their own organization? Because I feel like the people problem is one of the most pervasive across all industries.
Sure.
and all
Yeah.
types of walks of life.
I think other people identified it in me, right? I think it was, first of all, I didn't have that category, right? I didn't know I didn't know the integrator role existed. There was a guy, this was a guy that had started multiple businesses. He's currently a VC. And when he could tell that I had changed multiple jobs, and at one point he asked me, he was a friend, I wasn't working with him. He asked me, it's like, how comfortable would you be a number two somewhere? Now, he had different irons in the fire, and I was like, oh, he's thinking about me, possibly see if I'm interested in joining one of his companies. And I was in a stage in life where what I realized for myself that I really struggled. This is a bit of a side subject, but I think it might be helpful for some people that have thought about starting a business, but realize maybe don't have the entrepreneurial chops. Is I was at a place where I recognized in myself that I really struggled with taking a lot of ownership for the outcome of a business. So high conscientiousness, high willingness to sacrifice myself and sacrifice my family for the outcome. But I would really get burned out when I had no control of the inputs or enough inputs that I was like, wait a minute, I want this guy to stay on our team, and I want to, I offered this income to him, I offered this salary to him. You as, other owner cannot come now and tell me that I need to cut his salary. I'm going to lose this guy. It's like that type of stuff, right? Or I worked for a family office for a few years, and they were making strategic changes so quickly that, from one day to the next, the guy said, hey, I need you to start working night shift. I had 4 kids, and I had to start looking at the markets on the screen from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, and start next month. And I was like, what? And so those type of decisions.
End up doing that, or did you?
I did.
You did.
The goal was to do it for 6 months while the business tried to figure out if we were going to open an office in Europe and do that kind of stuff. And that 6 months stretched to 18 months and burned myself out and quit. Right.
Holy
so that was,
smokes.
So I worked nights for 18 months, just looking at a Bloomberg terminal for, until my brain exploded.
And you had 4 children at the time.
So I was sleeping on and off, somewhere between 4 and 6 hours a day during the day. And the first 6 months started in June. So the first 3 months was in summer. And my kids were like, there's going to be some therapy sessions for those poor kids at some point. Because I lost my schnitzel a few times, it's like, and it was totally, like in hindsight, it was all sleep related, like.
It's crazy. The more research that comes out, I'm really into, and you probably are the same, if you played sports at a high level, and when you get to that high level, you have to understand that the difference between the very best and everyone else they do the fundamentals every single time consistently.
Yeah.
And sleep turns out is one of the most important for your physiological
100%.
needs. It doesn't matter what sport you're in. So I totally get that.
I think relationally, I mean, you could probably start every therapy session if you were a therapist and say, hey, have you eaten well? Did you not drink too much? And did you sleep? If you cover that, then most other problems become a lot smaller. But I think I just ended up in these situations. So when that guy said, hey, would you be a number two? My first reaction was no, because I didn't want a number one to control my inputs, But man, that seed just kind of stuck in my head. It's like, I'm probably, because I had written down probably 50 entrepreneurial ideas I could never execute on. There's one, I have an idea now that I've been sitting on for probably 6 years that I have not executed on. It's a nonprofit, right? So too much of a perfectionist, too much sitting on the dock, waiting for the right opportunity, like all those thoughts. Like I'm very self-aware of why I'm not able to really push it all the way through, right? But man, being an improver, coming on the back end of something and making it better all the time, right? On the negative, that sounds like a perfectionist, annoying, cannot be content, all of that stuff. On the positive is like, hey, you're a reformer. You look for things to do better. And people that appreciate that and have gotten the energy to get something started and realize, hey, this thing is kind of getting out of hand, help me put it together, then man, I'm the guy, right? So that happened with Seal Solar. And that happened a little bit at WestRock too. At WestRock, where it was the family office turned hedge fund, it was more about communication. There was just a lot of ideas that would be thrown out. Hey, we could be this, we could do that, or it was an investment thesis. Whatever that was, I was the one that just said, hey, let me put those, 15 paragraphs into 2 sentences. It's like, let me put these 10 investment theses. What's the plural for thesis?
Yeah, that works.
Get those 10 different ideas into 1 or 2 that really make sense.
So you were effectively the Sir William of Occam. You deploy the Occam's razor.
I don't know what that is, man. I'm sorry.
All right.
Help me out.
I swung and I missed. Philosophical concept that essentially means often the best answer is that which takes into consideration all of the facts, but it's the shortest.
Yeah.
Right?
Tell me that.
It's why it's Occam's razor. Yeah. It's something why I think I studied poetry quite a bit in school, that I found that why is Shakespeare so like worldly renowned centuries later? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's because poetry is really hard. It's much easier to write research papers and long novels of, you use as many words as possible, but it's much more difficult to consolidate and concise and make every word sentence matter.
Makes sense.
Cool. So you've worked in a lot of different industries, property management, and energy, and family office, and finance, as well as, your first several decades being focused around almost social work or civil service. What are some of the commonalities between these different industries, and like what are some of the skill sets or tools and tricks you learn from, say, working with these teens and then working with family offices that are, it's quite different.
Yeah. I think no matter.
So we were talking about what commonalities across the various unique industries you've worked in. What skills are required to be successful in all of those?
So I think the commonalities, obviously people, but then organizationally, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a small group of people, a large group of people, there's an efficiency and effectiveness to getting things done that follows processes. So my first job working with kids, right? There was I think there's a need for structure for when we're going to eat meals, when we're going to go to, like, you can't have 10 kids choosing to do whatever they want, whenever they want to, right? Like if there was ever a time for structure and order, there would be a family of 10 people, right? Where everybody has to pay attention to each other's needs. So that type of setting rules and guidance and structure, I mean, even my kids probably get annoyed to death that sometimes the joke is add that to the rule book. It's like whatever else I told them lately is like, yeah, that's chapter 15, the page 9,655, all the rules that I've come up with. So that in terms of proclivity for doing that, but I would say whether it's my personality or the necessity, creating structure and order regardless of the organization, matters. The other thing is people. I mean, people are people. I think I've worked with and been around extremely successful, wealthy people, and as well as kids that I remember taking a kid home whose mom was sitting on the porch drinking, and the house consisted of mattresses on the floor with no windows, and the only food in the house was a bag of rice. It's like, this is in Newport, Arkansas. Things that you would think that are only happening in third world countries are just happening next door, right? So living in the space of the most successful people in this part of the country and the least of these, it's at the core. To me, they're all the same, right? Like I see no difference in the needs and wants and desires and expectations, communication. Like, all of that to me is all the same. And somebody might fool themselves in thinking that they are better internally,
above average.
Above average. Exactly. We may fool ourselves that somehow we have an insight into how the world works, and maybe we deserve what we got, or positively or negatively, and it's not. It is what it is, and we just make the best of it. So relating to them and bringing people together and being able to listen to them, or I would say this, and this is one of the reasons I accepted your random invite, is the fact that I'm curious, right? So I feel like, even with the commonality in all these different industries and different walks of life, is I'm always curious. Whether I'm on a bus, on a Greyhound bus in college, cutting across the country and sitting with an old lady and listening to her story for 2 or 3 hours, or just having a fireside chat with a multimillionaire. To me, it's the level of interest in the story it's just the same. We could have this very podcast reverse, where I'll be asking questions to you because I'm just as curious about you as I am about telling my story.
I love the frame, and I'll do my best to be concise, wherein whether it's the CEO or the janitor, people are people. They all have the same physiological, psychological needs, and treating everyone equally, I think, is a skill that, and I've had deep conversations with people that have been associated with large hedge funds and VC that are over 10 billion. And I'm equally as close with my old janitor in college, Larry,
Yeah.
And it's like, I think that's one of the pleasures of life, is just getting to know all walks of life and not assuming, right? Like, not judging a book by its cover, right? Being curious, like you said before, being curious is a superpower. And talking about podcasting, Joe Rogan claims that the only superpower he claims to have is he's just curious. And now he's the biggest media. He gets more viewers per week than major corporate media gets in a month. Yeah. So it'll take you far.
It's one of my favorite lines in Ted Lasso, is when it's gone viral, I'm sure, multiple times, when he's playing darts. Have you watched Ted Lasso? When he's playing darts against the rich guy?
I've never watched Ted Lasso, but I think I'm going to add it to the list for my wife and I at the end of the day.
It's basically this line where he challenges the rich evil guy in the story to a bet in darts, and the evil guy is supposedly really good, and he's throwing darts and makes a bet, and the bet basically resolves around Ted hitting a bunch of bullseyes, and the essence of him was stay curious. It's like, don't assume that because I'm from Wichita, Kansas, and that I don't know how to play darts in a British pub. Yeah. Because what happens is that every Sunday, my dad and I used to play darts for hours and hours, because that was the only time I could spend with my dad, right? And so he was an excellent dart player, and so he said, don't judge me by my cover, and stay curious. The line is better than that. You should find it, because it'd be worth your 15 seconds.
Oh, I'll definitely find that. Stefan, one of the things that I'm particularly curious to ask you is, if you could talk to either your 80-year-old self at the end of the day, or go back to when you were in Italy growing up, what would you tell them?
Man, you should have asked me that before the podcast. This is I'm gonna have to think about this.
You can sit on it. I'll ask you other questions. No problem.
No, you're good. Off the top of my head, I think to the 18-year-old, I would say everything is going to work out. And basketball is not the only thing. I think at that point, at 18 in particular, I thought basketball was the only thing, and I was really having a hard time envisioning a world outside of it. And then, various things occurred, and that I won't bore you with, but eventually thinking through other ideas and other options that just would not even on my radar. I would have never, I couldn't even picture the scenario that I'm in right now, right? Like, it's not even, it was not fathomable.
It reminds me of man plans, God laughs.
That's right. Yeah, very much so. To the 80-year-old self, what I would tell to my 80-year-old, probably, and I'm getting there. I think wisdom helps with this, is to kind of enjoy the moment as well, right? It's kind of tied to 18 as well, but I really have a difficult time enjoying the moment. I think fun is not a good word for me. Maybe it's, I think a lot of my closest friends, fun is a priority, and they always are driven by it and all that stuff. But I have a hard time with entertainment. I don't really watch movies much. I don't do a lot of stuff for fun. And that some of the advice that's been given to me is like, read fiction, and I just like reading fiction. To me is like nails on a chalkboard, right? It's like, why am I wasting? Like, I always feel like I have to be productive and I have to be doing something, and I think to my 80-year-old self, I would say read fiction, just sit on the porch and read fiction. Do you read fiction?
You just hit a chord for me. I got into philosophy because of fiction. When I was growing up, I was much like you, where the only thing that mattered was wrestling and sports, and I was very serious about it. But then I got down this path of reading at the end of the day so I could go to sleep, just from being so wired. I would read fiction until I couldn't stay awake anymore, and sometimes it would be way past. And I got into one fantasy series that just led me down this path of asking, questions and got into philosophy. And then I just stopped reading fiction altogether at a certain age. And I'm just like, maybe that's when I started getting the gray hairs and started to get a little bit of a widow's peak. And I think fiction keeps you young. And I just started yesterday picking up a series I wanted to read for years, The Witcher. So I would say you should read fiction, right? Because there is, if I can help to persuade you and sell you on it, sometimes fiction is more informative and can teach you more than nonfiction. And you don't know it until you're done. And I think sometimes sharpening the saw of like critical thinking and reading as skills, which I'm sure you've done in college and you're totally familiar with, like there's a lot to it. I'll give you some recommendations offline if you're open to it.
No, I'm definitely open to it. I've given it a shot here and there. The last shot I gave, well, I did read through one of the Harry Potters. I was super proud. I was really doing it. That one was motivated by my daughter's senior year in college, and I was really trying to. I was like, hey, she's very much into Harry Potter. If there's one thing I can do that kind of connects us, I'm going to read through it. Man, it was very difficult for me to. And then somebody else recommended, is it Watership Down? Is that sound right? Sorry.
No, that sounds familiar. I'm not quite familiar with that work, but.
Man, I could not finish it. It was atrocious. So the last two attempts have been tough, but I'm open. I stand ready to relax my shoulders, work on my pre-retirement,
Nice. Well, Stefan, the last leg of this interview, and I've had quite a bit of fun getting to know you and hearing your story so far, is a surprise. It's leave a question, ask a question. So the last guest that I had no idea who you were, and they have a question for you, which is, if you have one thing you change about your past that you could change and go back in time, what would it be? Like, what does your current self wish that your former self would do to help you out? What's one thing in your past that you could change to help you in your current state, the future?
I think probably better understanding the value of an MBA. I think, and I've tried to do the same for other people that I've considered going to business school. I think there's a ton of information that is marketing driven, and it's driven by trying to attract students into their programs. And I think most of it is accurate, but not sufficient. And therefore, whatever trade-off somebody needs to do, they need to understand very carefully what they're getting themselves into, and not waste their time. Like, I think business school can be a massive waste of money and time if it's not well understood. That I think would have changed significantly my career, and I think I would have prepared financially differently. I think it impacted me. Now, granted, I started in 2007, got out in 2009, so it was probably the worst time in history to ever go to business school. And there was no way to know about it in 2007 when I entered.
Yeah, I can't predict the future.
Yeah, so that probably has had a factor in it. But in hindsight, 2020, I would still say playing for it better, know what you're buying, you know.
That's an interesting one. I was seriously considering going back to get my MBA at the exact same time that the owner of the company I was working for got into EOS. So the only reason I did not go back and make that decision to get my MBA is because I started EOS with an implementer, and I was like, well, this is scratching that itch for me. I'd rather just take this as part of the comp package with the company I'm at.
100%. I think that covers a lot. If somebody wanted to really kind of help, if one of the motivation for business school was to know and understand business better, then I would say it covers the majority of that, especially a small meeting.
If the motivation is networking, EOS may not scratch that.
Correct. That's exactly right.
What question do you have for my next guest? And I won't tell you who it is.
Oh man, that's a tough one.
I'll tell you after the show.
Let's see. Question for the next person. What is one thing that you have been procrastinating that you need to start doing this weekend?
Love it. That's tactical. It's a smart goal. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound. Good. Well, Stefan, we're about at the hour mark. I want to thank you for your time and for taking the risk on that 1 out of 100 chance that you actually reply to a marketing message in LinkedIn. I have nothing to sell you. And everyone listening, I don't have anything to sell you either. I don't run ads in the show. I don't ever plan to. My only ask is that if you enjoyed this conversation, you found some valuable insights, it helped you to get through a problem you may be stuck with in pursuit of your goal, share it with a friend. It's the only way the show grows.
Sure.
Stefan, thank you. And everyone else, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your stimulating questions.